a small discussion of the theaetetus and how was perception accounted for in this Platonic dialogue. And we're going to move on to a more modern account for perception and for knowledge in the philosophies of Kant and Hegel. And we're going to look at how perception as this middle term interacts or somehow mediates the world to us and mediates us to the world in a certain sense too. And hopefully everything will come across as clearly as possible, because the texts that we're dealing with, I did with, is difficult for me, and I hope that something could come across as useful or stir up like a good discussion afterwards. After these ideas, yeah. So yes, so starting off by the theaetetus, we can see here that Plato, in the discussion of the theory of flux, can you see the quotes clearly? Yes. Okay, so Plato in his account for the theory of flux, or Socrates, as is discussed in the theaetetus, he says that if everything is changing, if everything changes around us in the world, okay, then the moment that you catch through perception loses its instantaneous reality to you and becomes another moment and becomes not perception. So in a sense, the world as something that is changing fails to provide us with some sort of a grasp on what things really are through this mediation, through perception. So the point that is being made at this level in the theaetetus is that perception as some sort of a relation to something that is changing cannot provide us with an actual, cannot help us grab a hold of what is being perceived, because it is as much perception as it is non-perception. Yes? So yes, if we actually look here, the criticism of knowledge is perception goes for it. It says that if knowledge is perception, if knowledge of things that are changing is perception, then it would be similar to us. We would be similar to like a Trojan horse, where there is just a flux of things, a flux of perceived presentations in the mind with no sense being made towards them. And that is another criticism that Socrates presents forth in relation to the claim that knowledge is perception, which is that you need much more than just sensing stuff and being and perceiving them for you to make sense of them, for them to be actually combined in some sort of an object or a concept. Okay. So as he says here in the last part, that these perceptions converge onto a single identity, with which we perceive whatever there is to be perceived by means of its organs or the senses. And the point being made here is that these perceptions are not just only perceptions in the mind when it comes to concepts or whatever. They are, in a sense, combinations or syntheses of these different presentations in the mind as perceived or as brought forth to us by means of organs and the senses. So at this level, we could see very clearly that there is an equation being made between sensing and perception. So, and that is something that we should ponder. We should ponder at, and we should consider its validity. Whether perception is just a mere passing over or going through of what the senses perceive to the mind, or is it more than that?
Can we just ask if perception is also part of consciousness, which is a very hard topic in philosophy? and science because we're not yet aware of what
Yes,
consciousness
yeah,
is.
it is a problem of consciousness, and
Yes,
the following thinkers will be discussing consciousness per se and self-consciousness per se in the attempt of making perception much more than just the going through of what is perceived or what is sensed into the mind. It's not just a medium, it becomes an action, it becomes some sort of a way of interacting with the world. Yes, so how he establishes this point it's through like the Socratic method, as we know, the linkers, and he puts forth this question is that the things you perceive by means of one faculty cannot be perceived by another faculty. Cannot be perceived by means of another. For example, that objects of hearing cannot be objects of seeing. And that is the criticism he puts forth for the fact that things that are combined in us as objects of knowledge, not just perceptions, because, for example, I can hear Jordan and I can see Jordan. However, Jordan as an object is not what I perceive of him, but what I combined out of the different perceptions. So the action in this Platonic framework is involved in the mind. Is in the mind. The action or the activity, the self-activity is in the mind. It's not with the world. It's not through perception. However, it's through reflection and it's through the combination of the different perceptions into one concept. And that is how perception fails to become knowledge in this dialogue. Yes, yes, is that clear for everybody? Yes. And he goes on to actually give us the criteria through which these combinations happen. And he speaks of the activity of the mind by itself. It's the reflection or the combination done by the mind by itself to give an account of the objects or the perceptions that we have been exposed to. This activity has some sort of goal, and this goal is commonality. This activity that is done by the mind to combine or make sense of different perceptions is the mind looking for commonality. And that is also something that we should ponder at, and that will be discussed in detail afterwards, which is that whether or not the mind wants to combine or not with the objects of perception. Is it the doings of language? Is it the doings of the mind by itself, like something that has its predetermined function, or what is exactly this tendency? And he speaks of, for example, like constructions or pillars of this self-activity of the mind investigating by itself, which is, for example, looking for similarity, dissimilarity, identity, difference, and other things that essentially allow for this commonality to come forth. And that is what is being discussed here when he says that actually the being of an object is not given through the fact that you're seeing it. However, it's given through the fact that the mind investigates it by itself. Similar to similarity, dissimilarity, identity, and difference. And that is a very important claim to be discussed afterwards. So it is important that you guys actually visualize what is being said here. That the being of an object, the existence of an object, is not given to the fact that you have perceived it. It's given through the mind investigating it by itself.
Yes, it's like this is table, for example, our mind perceives it as a table.
Yes.
However, if you go to anyone in the science department,
Yes.
you will find molecules, and you will find electrons, and you will find that this table is not actually the same table that was there last year. A lot of things changed inside.
That's Heidegger's one of the thing. He exactly made that thing
The
same
being itself is not what it is because the mind is just making it so, but
Yeah, so and that
it-
is exactly
Yes.
the point that
That's why
is
perceiving is very different from knowledge. Very, very different. We
Uh,
cannot know what evidence moved from last year up to now. We cannot see it. We're only perceiving this as a chair with a table.
Yes, yes, and that is
This is
the
not
point.
knowledge. We are only perceiving the shape from outside.
Yes, and that is the point that is made by Socrates. However, the model that you're actually bringing forth is a model where a stable truth of a thing doesn't exist. So he would agree with you that perception is not knowledge. However, he wouldn't agree with you that this table is entirely changing.
No, it's not.
The concept of a table, the knowledge of a table.
Making up the shape of
I'm not arguing.
experience of what a table looks like. So this is how we perceive things.
Yeah, so the point here is not to actually comment and answer. It's really an exposition of different thinkers have been putting forth and how they relate to each other and what are the possible outlooks that we could use from the different ways of thinking. So it isn't precisely that we're trying to negate that knowledge is perception or affirm that knowledge is perception. It's precisely an exposition of why is it not perception and why could it be perception and what exactly is perception and how is it accounted for in the different systems that we're going to discuss. And yes, I think that that does it for Socrates. So, for example, if we look at this part of the dialogue here, he says that what name do you give to the former? To seeing, hearing, smelling, feeling cold, feeling warm. And Theocritus says that is perceiving. So perceiving is, in this framework, the way you're affected by things. Okay? And you can call the whole lot perception then, and he says I have to, and then that is something we agree, there's no point in grasping true science, since it doesn't even grasp being. Okay, so there is actually an equality between truth and being. So something that is true is said to exist. Okay, and he also says, and therefore it has nothing to do with knowledge. So perception has nothing to do with knowledge. That's a very good thing to make because, and we will see this later, the way you interact with the world provides you with information about the world. However, this complete detachment from what could the world be and to find the being of a thing is not passed over to you when you're interacting with the thing. However, you project it in some way over the thing through the mind's self-activity. The same way you project similarity, dissimilarity, identity, and difference. And I think that is yes, so I think this is essentially what is being said about perception and knowledge in the Platonic framework. Okay, so for example, he says here, instead we look for it, i.e. truth or knowledge, in whatever one calls that function of the mind, when it is involved with things by itself. That's called thinking. Socrates, I suppose. Socrates, you're right, man. So actually, there's something to be said here about how thinking in itself becomes the only way to arrive at knowledge. It isn't that you sense an object and then you think about it and then you arrive at it. It's knowledge. However, it's the thinking that arrives that takes you towards knowledge itself. As if knowledge is one immovable thing. And it's not a knowledge of something, it's knowledge as such. Do you guys follow and do you agree with this interpretation of what's being said? So that brings us to this illustration right here. So in the Platonic framework, there is this immovable, perfect world of the essences, the Platonic world, and it's accessible through the mind. So when you're looking for knowledge, you're looking for the form of knowledge. And if you want to know what knowledge is, you have to look away from the world and look through this self-activity, the investigation of the mind by itself into the world of the forms to actually have a grasp of what constitutes knowledge. Okay.
Yeah, I can give an example for that. For
Yeah.
example, when we were kids,
Yeah.
someone asked the science teacher, "Miss, هو مش المفروض إن النسكافيه بيخلي الناس تسهر Nescafe makes people stay late, stay awake for long hours at night?" Yes, but Miss, Basim cannot sleep every night without drinking Nescafe, and he falls asleep right after it. So what constitutes knowledge? We have to look in the forms of the world, because I think that everyone is different.
Mm.
Some people just can't handle coffee, some people can. Some people can sleep, some people cannot.
Mm. I actually like the way you frame it, because you see some people can and some people cannot.
Cannot.
And
So
you bring it,
what is knowledge then?
and then you bring in, you bring in,
You have to investigate into many forms
yeah,
and many realities in order to be sure about a certain
yes,
stuff.
yes, exactly, exactly. However, what is being said here is actually a bit different from what you're saying, in the sense that he is calling upon thinking, and just that. Not sensibility. So, for example, what you're saying is some sort of involvement with what people are and what people represent and what people do,
Yeah,
and what could constitute them. So in this example, you're not entirely thinking. You're actually being involved.
I'm
with the world.
observing.
Yes, so it's observation as in what's given to you through sensibility or any of the like, and then you're reflecting on it through the thinking. Okay.
Thinking, this is where it takes us to go to the biology department and ask, do people just have very different information with themselves than others?
Yes, but
So that's where thinking leads us to.
yeah, what is being said is that it's just thinking. It's just knowledge or being or truth is not given at all. It's complete nullity when you're speaking of the world of the shadows. Okay, and that relates to the allegory of the cave. You guys know the allegory of the cave, and you have to just contemplate the form of the world or the forms or the world of the forms for you to be able to get away from the shadows.
Perhaps to help us, could you give an example of what Plato is proposing this activity look like? Like what kind of investigation is the act of thinking? How would Plato want us to?
Yes, that's a really good question. So, for example, actually, the way he starts out, the Theaetetus by Socrates asking the Theaetetus what is knowledge, and then he says the Theaetetus says that knowledge is the knowledge of shoes or of carpentry or whatever. And he gives a number of examples, but Socrates negates this reference, negates the of. It's not knowledge of something. I want to know what knowledge is. And they go on, and then Theaetetus gives him an example of him organizing rational numbers in a group and calling them rational numbers, and then categorizing and grouping irrational numbers in another group and calling it irrational numbers. And through that, you have a concept, knowledge of a concept that is exhaustive of what constitutes an irrational number, okay, without needing to actually involve yourself in rational number as instances or shadows of what is the rational number, what constitutes a rational or an irrational number. So it's the negation of any form of difference or of appeal to the shadows, to what is perceived, and an information of what you could actually arrive at by thinking, by self-activity, or by controlled spontaneity. It's just self-activity. Did that answer your question? Thank you. Yeah. So yes, mentioning yes.
Let me bring a new idea, because I think people jump from the Theaetetus to the Republic pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also Theaetetus was written after the Republic, and it forms and everything's in the background and so on. So it seems that people interpret the Theaetetus often as hinting to the forms, but the forms are not really mentioned in there. And I don't think is even his entire analysis of justified true belief is aiming at the forms. So the justifications that he brings are about the object that you actually can see.
Yeah.
It's always about how can you justify the beliefs about the objects that you will have some kind of acquaintance with.
Yes.
And that's quite interesting, because in some way the starting point still seems that some form of perception is necessary, but then you have to go beyond the perception.
Yes.
And what he says also in the quote that you brought. So the thing is that you can have this mere images in your mind,
Yeah.
but then you have to go beyond in order to categorize them, to order them, and so on. Then he brings actually examples what the mind can do. So the mind is then comparing. So the similarity, and so the mind is then comparing. And then with this kind of analysis, then you may have an idea whether the stuff that you actually perceive actually exists. Because you can just have an illusion. And in order, then maybe with some further illusions, you can have some analysis, and you find out, oh, it's not something that exists as, I don't know, some kind of, I don't know, whatever, these kind of things.
Yeah, so I actually understand your point. Is that the point is being made, Dr. Mayo, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Socrates, when he mentions that the investigations of the mind by itself, is actually referring to investigations of the mind by itself of objects of perception. Yes, and that is true in this case, but I think why I did this leap of faith or whatever from the Theaetetus to the Republic of the Idea of Forms is that you could say that he is in a sense responding to a claim. Knowledge is perception. And he is, in a sense, deconstructing that claim. He is dealing with it, and he is looking at it from different perspective and seeing its indications. However, constantly, the criteria for the validity of any of the implications of knowledge as perception is measured upon some truth that isn't arrived at through perception at all.
Exactly, yeah, that's
all. And that is where I can see the transition. It's in the assumptions that are being made. So it isn't precisely that he's saying in the Theaetetus that there are forms that we should look at or that we should ponder to arrive at knowledge, but in the sense of how he treats a foreign claim. He treats it with his own view of how things should have essences, and these essences are arrived at by the mind through itself, and actually just to maybe wrap up the answer to this question is that when I speak of similarity between something and another as objects of perceptions, the thing is that he doesn't precisely say that they're objects of perception. So he speaks of the possibility of comparison in the mind. However, he never says that, for example, this object is how I see it. So in this case, the comparison would be with the comparison in the mind would become between perfect objects that are not there in the world. So do you understand what I'm trying to say? Is that you could say that he is humbling down his actual view in the Theaetetus to actually discuss this certain claim that knowledge is perception. But what I think and how I interpret this text is that he is just using the formal structure to deal with this. But what is actually at hand, if you ask him the question, what are you comparing? Could you compare two objects of perception? And this comparison would assume some sort of truth to these two perceptions, however, they're just not true. That's how I interpreted how he's dealing. And I think I could be justified in this interpretation because this is a methodical treatment of the issue. Knowledge is perception. He is using a certain method, i.e., the Elenchus, using his own tools, i.e., his epistemological, already existing epistemological or metaphysical view in relation to what is given. So, in a sense, it is dealing with this precise example through another a whole package that is really what he's trying to say, I think.
Yeah, I think you can make some jump to the forms, but I don't see that in the text. I mean, the thing is that all the examples that he gives with the writing of the letters and the mark of Theaetetus, all about the things that you can actually see. And the question is, how can you have true beliefs about the things that you actually see? And then he has to go through some analysis of doing that. And he doesn't even, I mean, he doesn't bring this kind of abstract examples like before. He doesn't talk about what is courage, what is love, and so on. So okay, we have to investigate the form of love, the form of courage. And this is then what we have to do with dialectics and Elenchus and so on. But he doesn't do it there. He doesn't say in order to have justified true belief, you have to go and do some kind of dialectics.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I understand.
He does dialectics throughout the entire dialogue in order to find out what knowledge is.
Yeah.
But in order to say, okay, what is a justification? So that you have to do the justification is to go and find someone else that this is not, it's a little bit different.
I understand. And actually, that could have been a better way to introduce this section, which is that I am dealing with how he actually deals with perception and how he deciphers this concept as given in the statement knowledge is perception.
That's right, yes.
And I'm just dealing with the method and what could be the package and relating it to other texts. So precisely that. But actually, yes, he moves on to other sections where he speaks of justified true belief and other forms or ideas about what would constitute knowledge.
That would take us to a very good question. Can we actually reach knowledge? Absolute knowledge?
Yes, exactly. I like how you said absolute knowledge.
Yes, because everything is changing and it looks like even planet Earth changed its citizen every 100 years. People change every 100 years. They're not like, it's not like we are going 100 years, people are not going to be born without 2 eyes, they are going to have 3 or 4. No, they change. Like the biochemistry changes somehow, like only like 2 or 3% difference.
Yes.
Every 100 years.
Yeah.
So
yes, I understand. And that's
by thinking like that and comparing.
Actually, yes, and the answer at the end of the talk, hopefully, we could. Yes, it's going to be a system where absolute knowledge could be reached in a changing world. So yes, so the point that I just want to make here is that there is an involvement of the world as a subject. Okay, and that is just a given in Socrates.
Yes.
And when you say absolute knowledge of what? Okay, I'm going to
say marriage.
Okay. So however,
It changed.
Yeah, and we've raised some problems or some issues that could arise from this view, and I think it's resulted or it's a consequence of, and maybe it's not a problem, but the issues we've discussed is a result of knowledge being an activity by the mind itself, and the dropping down of sensibility, for example. Okay, at least in this account, and I would like to move on to another system, the system of Kant, and to see how actually perception or presentations are dealt with in a system where knowledge of things is possible, but it's not just of things, it's things as they appear. It's knowledge of appearances. Okay. So in a sense, Socrates, to account for change, he or Plato or whomever is the author of this idea, he suppose the existence, even if it's not exactly in the theaetetus, we suppose the existence of something, some perfect world that projects in the mind the forms that could actually go on and decipher objects of the world as objects and attribute concepts and to be exhaustive of all instances or all differences of something. Yes? However, if we actually get rid or bracket the idea of or the possibility of or bracket like the things in themselves actually bracket what constitutes the object what constitutes the object or what constitutes the stuff that we're discussing, and we look at knowledge of things as they appear, we'd actually see that sensibility here is very important, because in the previous system you could see or you could deal with sensibility, you could deal with knowledge of an object, not just as it appears, but what it is, and what it is what it is. Part of it is how it appears. Do you understand this point? Because appearance becomes actually part of knowledge.
Yes, I would say to see that because of scientific experiments. For example, you can experiment or test a certain medicine.
Yes.
It can work for like 20 or 30 years, and then all of a sudden it's not working.
Yeah,
So things as how they appear
yeah,
and how you sense it. So you have to use your hearing and seeing.
yes, and
And keep in mind that these days in Egypt we have a lot of encounters that are rather bizarre. Like Luis Shabak, this microbus that suddenly disappeared.
yeah,
Did it come from another dimension, a ghost?
Mm.
And someone was buried in the Qahliya or Manufaya last month, and he woke up from death. So that would be like, it's hard to answer it. Like, we have to, now we depended on seeing and hearing.
yes,
Because this is, that goes against what we know too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, this is actually what I'm trying to say is that it's important to include sensibility. It's important to include sensibility, and if we want to include sensibility or the way we see things and how we deal or how we know the world, we have to include it in the process of knowledge, and we could revive perception as some sort of a way of dealing with stuff in the world. Okay. But however, if you guys remember at the beginning of this discussion, the criteria or the most devastating criticism to the idea that knowledge is perception was when we said that when I perceive what I perceive the voice of Jordan, for example, with is different from what I perceive the voice Jordan or how he looks or whatever. However, there is this combination of all of what I have seen into the concept of who he is as he appears. Okay. However, this whole thing is only possible because I can think of it. And this experience of myself it's necessary for the coming forth of such a statement, because, for example, any form of government, for example, Jordan is told, for example, the truth of this, or the possibility of this statement only comes forth as a consequence of the I think accompanying that statement.
Yes, and
Yeah,
it has
you
to
guys-
do with experience. For example, there was like, yeah, usually don't use this analogy, but like Ocho, the very great meditator and teacher Ocho, who died in 2012, he, like, I think he had a book called The Mustard Seed. It was a commentary on the Bible, I think. Someone said, like, there was a kid who once looked at the garden and an adult asked him, are the people in the gardens males or females? And they were all naked, both males and females. The kid said, I cannot tell because they don't have clothes on. He can only perceive and tell if they are male or female because of the type of clothes. How do we think that someone is tall and someone is short? It's because of our experience of the world.
Sorry, but due to time, can we leave questions and commentaries
Yes.
at the end?
Yeah, so but thank you for this comment, and that actually relates to the possibility of my judgment and it's precisely that my judgment of the thing is only possible if I think, and this thinking does not just work by itself; it works hand in hand with, for example, what I see of the world, because this is essentially a judgment of what I see. And at this moment right here, just to be very clear and to the point, we're speaking of combination, okay, the combination of different perceptions or presentations given through you sensing it, okay, and applying concepts that allow for understanding to come up with some sort of judgment about what this thing is as it appears empirically through experience, and all of this is only possible if I think, if there is this unified self-consciousness that could bring forth such a claim. Is there any part that what I said here that isn't clear? Do you guys see how it actually builds on what we've been discussing before, Socrates? So sense has been brought down, and for the sake of bringing forth knowledge of the things as they are in the world. However, appearance is also part of what they are in the world. So, in the sense, we're obliged to bring in sense again into the equation. Okay. However, when you bring in sense again, somehow the object in itself is not accessible through sense, and hence knowledge or this understanding or this conceptualization or this combination through this self-consciousness, through my self-consciousness, is only brought forth when we have thought and sense. Thought exemplified in the categories as in similarity and dissimilarity, identity and difference that Socrates mentioned, but also some more, and sensibility as the way you're affected by the world through sense. Yes, and that is another system that has been put forth during the Enlightenment, which is the content system. Okay. So you guys saw this, yeah? So this is a quote from the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant's masterpiece. It says that understanding, speaking generally, is the power of cognitions. Cognitions consist in determinate reference of given presentation to an object, and an object is that in whose concept the manifold of given intuition is united. Yeah, so this the compass is very obscure and hard to understand, but actually, if you decipher it, cognition, as in this experience of a united, of a combined object, of a combined object of knowledge. Cognition is the I thinking this combined object of knowledge, these combined presentations. And cognition consists in this determinate reference. And here the of is brought back, the reference, knowledge of something. I'm thinking of this thing. Okay. So knowledge becomes actualized in this system by referencing, not by looking into another world, but actually involving yourself with the things as they appear to you. Okay, an appearance comes in the next sentence, and an object in whose concept the manifold of a given intuition is united. The manifold of a given intuition is just a fancy word for saying all of the presentations of that object through your sensibility, okay, through the way you're affected by the soul. And here the object is not just a shadow. Okay, it might be just an appearance, but it exercises some sort of influence. However, it's a very minimal influence. Yes.
Is this the thing in itself?
Yes, the thing is that
That's the question, are we knowing the object, or the object has to be postulated as
Yeah.
in which these things are?
Exactly. This is not the thing itself. This is exactly some sort of the united self-consciousness, i.e., I thinking the appearance of an object. Because this combination that has been put forth as a criterion for knowledge or a test for knowledge in the theaetetus is only possible if you actually sense the object and think about it. And this brings about understanding and brings about the actual, yes, I thinking an object as a unified, something that I'm cognizant of. Yes? And speaking of the most important thing, the objective validity of that thing. Where does the objective validity of this perception lie? It lies, okay, so let's just read. So consequently, the reference of presentations to an object consists solely in this unity of consciousness, and hence so does their objective validity. So the unity of consciousness, or the unity of our perception, that Kant uses, or the Kant terms, is the prerequisite for objective validity. That is very yes.
Can you compare this to what you said before, the theaetetus? I mean, it looks very similar, just
Yeah,
a
it is.
very fancy way to
Yes,
describe
exactly.
that.
It is very extremely similar.
The critique of the theory of
Yes.
flux and so on, yeah.
Yeah, so the reference of presentations. So, but however, the difference is, as I mentioned, it's a reference, and that it includes sensibility, and that is somehow a way of being more involved with the world. So this is very clear because it includes forms of understanding, spontaneity, self-activity, the mind investigating by itself through referencing thought or the concepts or the categories of understanding, whether it be quantity, quality, and the other ones. And these bring forth combination or cognition or understanding as such of an object. However, it's always of something, and this reference is always through sensibility, and sensibility is always referencing to the thing as it appears. Yes.
You said that mind investigates by itself. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's some sort of self-activity. It's what Kant calls spontaneity.
Like when you see something is happening at a certain time every year, then simply you are going to perceive or understand that this is a fixed reality. It is going to rain.
Actually, he says the very exact opposite of this. He says that this is exactly
Like
not objective validity, no matter how it is perceived. And I think we should.
mind
Sure.
investigate by itself, like the subconscious can record. I think there was a psychologist in the 19th century who said that our minds can record memories that we don't see, like stuff that we don't see, it's recorded in the subconscious. That be an example?
All the activity Kant discusses is in the conscious.
Yes.
Validates by itself, like it can come to conclusion, like suddenly you have an idea to solve a problem all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So would that be an example of validating by itself?
Actually, that this is an empirical way of actually coming to know something. However, this has no objective validity, zero objective validity for Kant. Because the objective validity, as you can see here, look at this underline part. I could not say the body is heavy, which I'm once saying that that these two presentations are not merely to hinder perception, no matter how often repeated. So repetition of some sort of engagement with the world does not provide an objective validity. Okay, I could not say this. This is not objectively valid. This is you interacting with the world constantly in a certain way, resulting in the same empirical combination. However, the objective validity only arises through the pure, unempirical, a priori, or however you want to discuss it, pure cognition, which is possible through thinking and through sensibility in their pure forms. So, for example, an object is heavy because I cannot think of a body that does not have any weight. It would lead, so yes, so they are combining the object independent of what the subject state is. So in a sense, I should refer to the pure unity of a person, or the pure unity of self-consciousness as an I, okay, that makes possible thinking of a concept and combining these presentations in a concept as my presentation, as mine. This thought becomes mine, okay? This unity brings forth these constituents of understanding, thinking, and sensibility into a criteria for objective validity. So what I'm thinking is only objectively valid because I could not think of it as otherwise. So it's not just correspondence anymore.
Yeah, just like the fire burns me, the fire is very hot because I think that it's very hard for me.
It's still empirical, and this is a very good cycle. It's still empirical and still causal. He's discussing concepts as of understanding as such, synthesized with sensible intuitions or senses in general, allowing for knowledge only or cognition only of empirical or only of objects of experience. So actually causality is a category of understanding, is a concept of understanding that is used, for example, to think. And it will be true in the sense that it combines this presentation of this concept. For example, the presentation of me being hurt by fire, feeling hot, and fire in the concept of causality, in self-consciousness, in the fact that I think that this way, allowing for an objectively valid statement about fire being, for example, a hazard to the integrity of the body. Yes. I know it's a bit difficult to follow, but the way it's similar, it's so different was just profound, and actually the problem that I felt reading this as something as a way of encountering the world in rejecting it is actually addressed here by actually saying that knowledge is only possible of the objects of experience. However, the world is demeaned to only appearance. Yes? Is it clear? I don't want to go through all of these quotes because it's going to be hectic. Yes. So, yeah. Yeah. So again, this exactly describes what I'm saying here. That cognition or understanding is possible through the concept. Sorry, I used cognition and understanding interchangeably, which shouldn't be the case. So cognition, concept, and intuition, sensing, and having a concept and the categories of what you could think. Okay, intuition is entirely sensible. You cannot have an intuition of something that does not exist in the world. It's always an object of experience. That's why, for example, Kant limits the possibility or limits what you could say about metaphysical matters. And he says here, hence, in us thinking an object as such by means of a pure concept, i.e., causality, quantity, relation, whatever the concepts are, can become cognition only insofar as this concept is referred to objects of the senses. Okay, and there is an obvious problem to this statement, which is like math. Okay, math is not sensible in a sense. However, so Kant says, I understood in dealing with this part, that math is only cognition, or is only cognition. Yes, it's only cognition when it could be like a form for further application in the world. So yeah, I actually thought, what does he mean? What does he mean by it? So
Just to jump in, I think
Yeah.
it doesn't not say, and maybe helpful,
Yeah.
concepts without tuition,
Line.
empty and tuition without concept
Line.
of one.
exactly.
I think that's sort of.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that in a nutshell what he's saying, and he has a lot more distinctions inside between pure unity of perception, like the pure way in which you synthesize your existence as an ego, when you have an empirical way which is done through pure intuition, but it's a whole issue, it's a whole different account for what is sense and how is sense possible. For example, because the subject is struck by his ability to sense, and that is the pure synthesis, figurative. He says it's figurative sense. It's the synthesis of the pure manifold intuition. Space and time. Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah, and that basically will summarize this whole encounter with the objects that they appear and the possible understanding of them, and how it happens through this reference through sensible intuition, and it refers back to the subject's self-activity. Yeah, but the assumption in this discussion or in this account is that understanding things does not intuit. What does this mean? So understanding that intuits for Kant is like an impossibility. You're not a human if you do it wrong. And what does an understanding that intuits mean? That as long as you think the object, it exists. So Kant, in a sense, is denying the ability that you could detect the being of something through sensing.
So that occurs to me at the antithesis of Berkeley, isn't it?
I don't know where to.
You mean as long as I think something it exists, while for Berkeley it was as long as
Yeah,
I perceive
yes. The way this
to be it is to be perceived.
Yes, exactly. So it would be like God. God does this. God thinks only that things that exist. God thinks it exists. Okay, and there's a very interesting, really interesting critique to this point, which is that how could you begin? How could you begin the process of knowledge if the things that you see do not exist? Okay. So that is exactly the Hegelian critique, and I will just try to illustrate this a little more. So when when a presentation is passed over in thinking, okay, for it to have any objective validity, and actually in sense, when something is passed over as a presentation in sense, for it to have any objective validity, it has to apply to my concepts of understanding. Why? Ask me a question, why? Why does the object have to abide by your experience, by your way of encountering? And why is its existence bracketed? Why did you start the process from the beginning? Why did you start the process of knowledge from the beginning if what you see isn't there?
Isn't not you just explain that by saying that it must have objective validity?
Yes, and the objective validity lies in its abidance.
It's kind of circular.
I mean, it might be like an issue of how I explained it. I don't know if it's actually simple or not. It's a big issue. But what I think, what I would say, or what I know Hegel's critique is that absolute knowledge, it is knowledge of the objects as they are, knowledge of like essence and concept combined, essence and object combined, I mean, absolute knowledge, okay? For example, in Kant is denied because you can't have absolute knowledge, you have knowledge of appearances. However, you starting the process of looking at the world, if the world is completely bracketed until it abides to your concepts of understanding, Okay, there is, I think, there is an issue here in dealing with the world that is there. You guys could help me explain better by asking questions.
And do you mean this, like in the ethic of practical reason, like when you try to engage with the word, you begin to have a grasp of what is that?
Exactly. Thank you for reminding me. So Hegel, in his starting out, like the part about consciousness, he says that we were trying to have knowledge of the object. Okay, we should avoid apprehending it, but we should try to apprehend it. We should not try to comprehend it while apprehending it, or something along it. This quote between these three different, our approach to the object must also be immediate or receptive. Okay, so in a sense, he's along the lines of content, the fact that you need to receive the object. However, we must alter nothing in the object as it presents itself. In apprehending it, we must refrain from trying to comprehend it. And the difference between apprehension and comprehension. Comprehension, for you to comprehend something, is for you to absolutely, completely devour it into you. While apprehending is just grabbing a hold of like a thread to begin with, and trying to have a grasp or interact or know this object of the world.
So comprehension is part of absolute knowledge.
Maybe it's the end of absolute knowledge, where essence becomes combined with the object, or I don't exactly precisely know. Or
Not truly comprehend and
so yeah, speaking of the process, at least on the level of sense certainty, which is the only thing I'm going to be able to discuss right here, the possibility of absolute knowledge. Let me actually bring in. Yes, here's the point. Yeah. So let me explain it the way he does. So yes, when you say now is there, okay, say that now is there, and he asks you in the book to write now is there on a piece of paper, and he says that if you write it on a piece of paper, it couldn't do to it any much harm as our perceiving of it. Okay, so writing it on paper is not going to do any harm to the true value of the statement. However, now look at it the other day. Now is night. Okay, so the object, the claim, the judgment of now as something that is given through sense, is something that is immediate, that he describes it as a this, absolute immediate this, an object that is just given to you in this pure encounter with the world, okay, an immediate, a receptive encounter with the world, or an encounter with the world where you're just trying to apprehend the world. You refer to it, you point to it as a this, okay. However, you made the judgment about it being night, however, it's not night anymore. Okay. And again, this process goes on again. Okay, it becomes day again. Okay. And Hegel's point is that the now as an object that is sensed is there anyway, and it preserves itself. Okay, and he speaks of this self-preservation. How does this self-preservation come to be? It's because it's a not this as long and as much this as that. What does he mean by this? So it preserves itself now, preserves itself as the negation of what you're saying, of the essence or of what your mind made of that thing. Okay, you made of now to be night. Okay, however, now resists being night and preserves itself to also being day. but it's always through not being night, not being day, and being both at the same time.
How is that?
Like I would say, like, for example, there is a specific rule. Like we have, for example, a strange phenomenon. Let it be green skies or green cats.
Yeah.
Okay, that's given to us. There are green cats
Yeah.
walking somehow
Mm.
at at specific time in the year. Why is this the truth? Because it is the opposite of there are no green cats.
Mm.
However, all of a sudden there are. That says a very newly discovered picture, green cats.
Actually, yes, you could.
Then we have to start apprehending without altering the nature. We are just not going to disturb the cats.
Yes.
We're not going to throw rocks at them or place it vibration device.
Yeah.
We try to apprehend how did this newly discovered creature come to be? What
Yeah.
are the functions of this green cat?
Yeah.
Like are they violent? Can they be domesticated?
Mm.
Are they herbivorous or omnivorous or carnivorous? Would that be a good example?
Actually, yes, it will be and a better example.
Nature.
A better example is with when you're saying, for example, time is absolute. You're-
I think good question.
Yeah.
How that's related to me comprehending absolute knowledge.
Okay, so absolute knowledge, from what I understood, is the stage in which object and essence are unified. Okay, what do I mean by object and what do I mean by essence? So, for example, yeah. So yes, so just to repeat, the essence, for example, here would be day or night. It's what you made of the object. Okay, but the object being the now itself. Okay, and the now preserves itself by being not the essence that you're saying, and being the whatever you say, and that is the concept of the dialectic, which is that actually the concept of the dialectic, which is the movement of the concept.
I understand from you now that by the changing of the now, the changing would be somehow the object,
Yeah.
while the essence stay the same. I still cannot purely comprehend something, reaching absolute knowledge, and then just apprehending it.
I now care. I remember something very amazing that some like a philosophy course mentioned it on Coursera, I think.
Mm.
There is a specific type of fish. It lives the first like 5 or 6 years of its life as a female. Then it changes to be a male for the next years and then female again. We perceive it as now it's female, in the next 5 years it's male. It didn't change itself.
Yes.
Its essence, this is how it is. It changes. But it is the same creature. We are not going to overnight see this type of fish turn into a lion, for example. So that would be example of the now, like today now it's night, then after a few hours it's day.
Yes.
The
Yes.
thing has to
Yes.
be
So
apprehended
yes. So
without
let-
being the exact change.
let's be with the one word. Maybe I'm not giving it justice.
Because the essence of this type of fish is to change. And the essence of the now is to change from my place.
Possible different essence. Do you know what it's being an essence is?
So yes. So that is exactly the problem. Is that he describes essence as relative.
Yes, that's what I was trying to get to. There are essences that don't change and there are essences that can change.
And this
Then
is
how
just,
do we have to change its gender?
Do you believe that essences do change in Hegelian concepts?
I have no idea what Hegel. I don't know.
so what's your question?
He's saying that Hegel argues that essences change.
It's by definition, the essence by definition is, for example, what you made off of that object. Okay. So for example, when you say that now is night, you're saying that the essence of now is, for example, night. Okay.
Hegel is an essence for time.
I'm thinking I think you're trying to look.
Would like to us RCT analysis.
Yeah, just don't. It's different. It's just different. It's
Yeah.
different. It's very different. So he gives. So look at the stages that he actually goes through. I point out to the now. So that is this reference, the this of sense certainty. Okay, you have an encounter with now as something that is brought forth to you when you're encountering the world and when you're beginning the process of knowledge. However, and it is asserted to be the truth because now, for example, is night. It is the truth. And I point out, however, as something that has been. Okay. You guys follow? Has been was as something that has been superseded. I set aside the first truth. So what he's trying to say in a nutshell is that, for example, I point out to this essence, to this now as night. I say that this is night. Okay. Now, the moment I point towards it, it's not now anymore. Okay, it slips away because I'm not trying to comprehend. Okay, it is superseded. It's superseded, and it is now has been. Okay. I now, and then we move on to the second stage. I now assert as the second truth that it has been, that it is superseded. Okay, so there is this intermediate truth of something as superseded. Okay, something as overcome, as negated. Okay, but what has been is not. What does that mean? This means that when I say that something has been, it's not there anymore. I'm negating it being. It's being there. I'm negating that now as night is not there anymore. It has been. It's not there anymore. Okay?
Then we have to come
Just
to
confused.
think of what is pure essence. Because he is confused, everything doesn't change, and you said it's relevant. What is pure essence?
I don't know precisely what pure essence is. What I know of it is that it's relative and it's what is made of the
You know
subject.
why it's relevant? Because certain animals. Yeah. Also certain uses, like cats don't see all colors that we see. So blue dogs. So what is truth? It is relative and essence is relative. Like a lot of things are relevant, not only essence.
So just to put it there. So we have gone through a number of systems or a number of ways to deal with knowledge and perception of the world. We have seen a way to encounter the world or to come at knowledge through, for example, only abiding in thinking about the object, thinking about similarity, and the fact that being becomes given in thinking, not in perceiving, and not in some sort of synthesis between perceiving and thinking. Okay. However, the objective validity in the other system becomes in the fact that they're all within a thinking subject that gives them an objective validity. Yes.
I don't think.
Okay, I'm just gonna wrap it up and we're gonna open it up for questions. So then this had the problem of treating things only as appearances. However, and negating that you could know things at all. However, for example, if being becomes given in sense certainty as an hegel, the fact that you point out to something, the fact that change does not take anything away from the fact that an object exists and I could have knowledge of that object, and it happens through the self-preservance of the object, and at the end of the day becoming identical to itself through a dialectical movement, through the moving principle of an object, which how we define the dialectic. We now have a more down-to-earth involvement with nature, however it might appear, and finding no problem in the fact that it changes, actually incorporating change, negation, flux into the system. And yes, this is basically what I wanted to come at.
That would also apply for human beings. I said earlier that the earth changes its citizen every 100 years. Does that mean that the now that once existed with humans is very different from the now that we're living now? 300 years ago?
This comes back to Aristotle's argument against.
Yeah, and the now is light after 7 or 12 hours each day.
Assuming a material world, assuming material world, I think the point about absolute knowledge is that there could be knowledge of the objects themselves, and there could be metaphysical knowledge, and there would be no problem in saying that things change, because things do change, and the way we encounter the world should account for that, and we should let go and actually ascribe to the very commonsensical idea that the existence of a thing is given to sense through the way I point at it. Yes.
So this is unrelated to perception, but so would you say that absolute spirit or Geist is kind of like the culmination of all of these paradoxes?
So absolute spirit, I think is just there. So it's for example, it's just rationality, and it persists and it progresses. It has a telos.
So it has nothing to do with this, like.
No, it is when we say something, and he brings actually had like a whole set of like references to how everybody this system works together, but I couldn't say it. So it's complicated, and maybe it wasn't suitable because it requires its own research and its own time. Yes, so.
I had a question about the meaning of the word being. Right, so we said first implicitly that being is in my thinking or my understanding. But then when we get to Hegel, I find it hard to maintain this formal definition while I'm being involved with things in the world as they are.
I think it could be actually the same, because in the sense that Hegel said that since certainty is essence or its truth, I mean its truth in the pure in immediate being. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's immediately. So it's an unmediated encounter with the thing as it presents itself. Okay, it's a bit phenomenological, and being here is just the standing there of an object. And actually, Heidegger speaks of that. So it's the standing there. It's the force of an object. Hegel speaks of the concept of force as the unifying, yet diversifying action of an object onto understanding.
That's what I was about to ask.
Yeah.
So Hegel's system introduces a kind of action of the object on the subject. So if it's a diagram, there's an object and a subject.
Yes.
In Plato's model, the object is merely imposing itself on the subject, but in Hegel's model, there's an interaction between.
Exactly, and that is why absolute knowledge or the dialectic happens, because there is this conflict between essence and the object, and there is this self-preservance through what he describes as the novelist, and as much this as that.
But it's not merely empirical, because the subject still
It's not
imposes some sort of meaning.
Exactly, and that is the role of essence, and how it's always negated for an end purpose or for like a teleology, which is arriving at absolute knowledge of the unity of these two things. Yeah. Yes.
So absolute knowledge would be when the essence is unified with the senses and the understanding of the subject.
That's the definition. That's the formal definition of absolute knowledge. It's the realization that all forms of objectivity are identical to those essential to the thinking subject. So that in construing the world conceptually, it is seeing everything in the form of self being something overactive principle of conceptual understanding. It is similar to actually Kant. Yeah. Yes.
To Hegel, can I achieve absolute knowledge? Like, is absolute knowledge possible to Hegel is one question, but In Hegel's system, is it possible for like me as
Not
Jordan?
necessarily for the subject. I don't think it is for the subject. That is actually the role of language and how language maintains this reference to the universal by negating what you mean, he means, the different meanings given through these instances of essence or whatever. And yes, this is what do you think?
No, that makes sense to me.
I have a question about immediacy and intersubjectivity. I find it hard to visualize, conceptualize this idea of all objectivity just being eminent in my subjectivity in a way, and eminent in a subjectivity of someone else. When I interact with this someone else, I find it hard to just imagine that.
Oh, it's good. It's nice that you bring the someone else. He has this section about this exact issue of dealing with someone else, and within that section, the same dialectic occurs, the same problem. It's one trying to overcome the other, one negating itself by being for another. It actually uses this terminology, being for itself and being for another, when you describing knowledge as well. When describing knowledge of objects, so object becomes being for another in immediacy, in perception. Okay. And he actually says that perception is deception. It is this disparity, it is the barrier between the object in itself and the object as for another. Okay. And through that dialectic comes forth, through that absolute knowledge comes forth through progress. I see Dr. Mike smiling.
This is
Yeah.
way over my head.
Yes.
I have a bit of a naive question about the country model.
Yeah.
You said that an object exists if and only if I can think of it.
Only
If and only if I can think of it.
yes.
That's objects in appearance, object in themselves.
You just can't speak of objects in themselves. You can't have knowledge of them.
My question is, I didn't understand what you said just earlier.
So you can't have knowledge of the thing in itself. I can't say anything about it, and anything you say about it, I'm not sure how you describe it, but at the end of the day, it makes much sense. Because you can't have knowledge of anything beyond experience, and that is the role of sensibility. But in Hegel, for example, sensibility provides being directly. The being of an object is just given there through this sensibility, other than actually being given through the self-activity of the subject. Yes, I think this is interesting because the traders gives you an outlook of how the conception of knowledge progressed. I know this could be a biased outlook because this is German idealism, but yeah, but these two people precisely influenced a lot of the movements in the current world that we're living in, and a lot of their ideas, especially the dialectic, for example, when it comes to Marx and other Hegelians, is very influential when it comes to all fields of so, yes.
I was promised some Heidegger.
Yeah, actually, I have this whole quote, and actually, a lot of what I was saying. Yes, right there. Like that. So, yes, this is Heidegger on Hegel. Okay, so he says, we are already those who know absolutely, otherwise, we could never begin. We can bring subject matter into view only if we, the contemplators, are those who know absolutely. And that is the basic criticism of that for you to begin knowing something, that this thing has to be. Okay? It has to be. This pure being is given in certainty by the fact that you point to it. And Hegel says this, so you point out, and he says it's this is like the structure of sincerity. And this reference, okay, happens through you referencing the object and referencing yourself. And he raises two questions: whether it's the objects, it's the object that provides immediate being for me, or me that provides immediate being for the object. And he negates those two. He negates either way, and he comes back to saying that self-certainty can only be itself, self-certainty. And that is actually the way he writes. He gives you this example about now, and he does this actual performance of negating now as night and then negating now as day, and saying that self-preservance happens through not being this or that, but being both and neither. And he does the same thing when he's trying to explain self-certainty. So, for example, the object cannot provide essence for me because it's a being for itself, and it's somehow mediated. It's not pure immediate being, which we agree to be the truth of self-certainty. And the subject cannot provide pure immediate being because the subject is the one who perceived night and is the one who perceived day, which both are now, neither is actually now. Okay. And in that, neither I nor the object provide pure immediate being, rather it's self-certainty itself in action in the world. When you're pointing out to this, that is in a nutshell what I thought he's trying to say. And there's a misunderstanding that Heidegger speaks of. He says that us saying that we know absolutely, it's not saying that our knowledge is full. He says here in the second underlined part, it is not the absolute fullness and its absolute presence. And speaking of absolute knowledge, which is required, but rather the character and way in which the absolute is, the absolute restlessness of mediation. And that is perception. Perception is this restlessness. It's you continually saying that this is something, you're perceiving and mediating it through this.
So then he's speaking of a kind of human nature, or like a nature of consciousness.
Yes, exactly. This chapter is about consciousness. Yeah. So when you're trying to explain something, the dialectical process will lead you to saying nothing but the things itself, just some sort of tautology that could be incomprehensible now based on the premise that absolute knowledge is not arrived at unless at a certain point. Yes.
So for Plato, knowledge didn't reference anything, it was just pure knowledge.
Yeah, it's
Knowledge
something that you'd inherent from a perfect world.
Yeah,
You'd recollect.
and this doesn't go in the model of
So for being, for example, in the case of Plato, is how it's provided through the subject's self-activity away from the shadows, away from the world. In Kant, it's in the subject along with the appearances of the world. In Kant, in Hegel, it's just with the world, in the world, in sense certainty itself, pure being is given. Okay, and it's a nice exposition of how thought progresses and how this idea of perception maybe is just pure deception that could provide nothing, but as something that in Kant, for example, as something that provides you with a presentation that you could then synthesize and have an objectively valid judgment about. And then in Hegel, it's something that is deceptive. However, it's just the necessary and it is the desirable or the way that we should deal with the world. Yeah, that is what I have to say. That's all I have.
That's what I expected, that absolute knowledge is something that we heard from the perfect world and might not be reached, in a very specific point in time. Because
I mean, it's
very hard to do
beyond
perfect knowledge about every single.
That relates to Jordan's point. That relates to Jordan's point. It's the sort of eyes that have absolute knowledge.
It's very hard.
Me. And that's why Heidegger consistently says we. He consistently says
Heidegger speaks of it as a collective project of humanity, right?
Yes.
It's a culmination of civilization.
Yes. Exactly.
so to summarize it, in which model can we reach absolute knowledge and in which model can we not?
I think in Plato's model you can have absolute knowledge. And in Kant's model, I think you could have, in Plato's, Hegel's model, I think you could have absolute knowledge, but it's just in a different way. And in Kant, you could have objectively valid statements about objects of opinion.
Actually, in Kant, if I may interject, in practical reasoning, if you interact with the world, you can, in a way, dispense knowing about the thing in itself. You can just deal with it without knowing it.
I think this is the door to Hegel, is
Yeah.
that in dispensing with knowing the thing imminently appears to you.
Yes. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank Khaled very much. I want to thank our audience in Zoom. And if anyone in Zoom has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for attending.
Thank you very much for attending.
If anyone in Zoom doesn't have anything, thank you guys for being here. And thank you all for attending. See you soon.